The snowstorm howled across the frozen wasteland. Ethan pushed through it, his boots sinking deep into the white dust. His helmet visor flickered with static, showing fragments of the ruined alien outpost ahead. He had been sent here to salvage old tech, but what he found that day would change his life forever. The wind carried strange sounds, metal clinking, faint and irregular. At first he thought it was debris moving in the storm, but then he heard it again. A soft, desperate rattle, like something alive. Ethan stopped. His breath fogged up the inside of his helmet as he turned toward the sound. The noise came from an underground level, beneath a cracked steel hatch half buried in snow. He brushed off the ice and pried it open, the hinges crying out after years of silence. A rush of stale, cold air escaped from below. He turned on his flashlight and climbed down. The corridor below was dark, filled with broken cables and collapsed walls. Lights flickered weakly from shattered panels. Ethan moved slowly, his boots crunching on glass. The sound came again, metal scraping, followed by a low whimper. His heart began to race. Someone or something was trapped down here. He reached a large chamber. In the corner stood a small cage, built from alien alloy. Inside it was a girl. She was not human. Her skin glowed faintly blue, her eyes large and shining even in the dark. She sat curled up, shivering, wearing thin rags that barely covered her small frame. When the light hit her, she covered her face and trembled harder. Ethan froze. He had seen alien prisoners before during the war, but never one this young. Her wrists were bruised from the cuffs. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was silent. Completely silent. He stepped closer. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't respond, only watched him with wide, fearful eyes. The control panel beside the cage was dead. He knelt to inspect it, finding old power cells drained of energy. Whoever locked her here never planned to come back. His radio cracked with static. "Ethan, report. You've been off-grid for 20 minutes. He hesitated. If he told command what he found, they would order him to leave her. They didn't care about aliens, especially not survivors. He looked back at the girl. She was shaking, hugging her knees, whispering something he couldn't hear. He made a choice. He pulled out a portable power cell from his toolkit and rewired the panel. Sparks jumped, the light above the cage flickered, and the lock released with a sharp click. The door swung open slowly. The girl didn't move. She stared at him, uncertain. Ethan removed his gloves and extended his hand. "It's okay. You're free now." For a moment, she just looked at his hand, her eyes wide and glassy. Then she reached out slowly, hesitant, trembling, and touched his fingers. Her skin was cold as ice. Before he could speak again, a loud alarm blared through the bunker. Red lights flashed on the walls. A mechanical voice echoed, "Unauthorized breach detected." Ethan cursed under his breath. Someone had set a security trap. He grabbed the girl and pulled her out of the cage. "We have to go now." She stumbled beside him, weak and frightened. Drones began to activate in the corridors, their red sensors glowing like angry eyes. The metallic buzz of engines filled the air. Ethan led her through the collapsing hallway, sparks falling from above. The storm outside raged louder than before, but it was better than being trapped in there. They burst out through the hatch as blaster fire cut through the snow behind them. Ethan pulled her close and ran toward the ridge where his rover was parked. The girl's bare feet slipped on the ice, so he lifted her up, holding her against his chest. She was freezing, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Hang on!" he shouted over the wind. The rover came into view, half buried in snow, lights blinking faintly. He climbed in and slammed the hatch shut just as laser fire scorched the ground outside. The girl hid her face in his jacket, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Ethan caught his breath and looked at her again. Her eyes met his, so full of fear, confusion, and something else. Hope. He handed her a small heat blanket and wrapped it around her. "You're safe, I promise." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she whispered one small, trembling word, barely audible. "Why?" Ethan looked at her, confused. "Why what?" "Why? Help me?" she asked softly, her voice rough from silence. He smiled faintly. Because no one deserves to be left in a cage. Outside, the storm roared louder, hiding the sound of distant machines closing in. Inside the rover, the faint glow of the heater touched her face. She watched him with cautious wonder, as if seeing a human for the first time, not as an enemy but as something different. Ethan started the engine. The rover shook to life, headlights cutting through the blizzard. As they sped away from the outpost, alarms faded behind them. The frozen planet swallowed the sound, leaving only the wind and 2 lives bound by one impossible act of kindness. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single choice made in a moment of mercy would change the fate of 2 worlds. The storm outside never stopped. The rover moved through waves of white snow like a small ship lost in an endless sea. Ethan held the controls tight while the small alien girl sat beside him wrapped in his coat. She still didn't speak much. Her glowing blue eyes kept looking at the window as if expecting someone to appear from the storm and drag her back. Ethan tried to keep the rover steady. The power cells were weak and the radar kept flashing red signs of movement behind them. The drones were still searching. He looked at her again. Her skin was pale and covered with faint marks from the cage. She held her hands close to her chest as if protecting herself from the cold and from the world. Ethan reached for a small ration bar and handed it to her. "Here, eat this, it'll help," he said softly. She shook her head, afraid. He tore the bar in half and took a bite, to show her it was safe. After a few seconds, she took the rest and ate in small, careful bites. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Ethan's vision blurred behind the fogging glass. He slowed down when the terrain ahead showed sharp cracks and ice cliffs. They couldn't keep driving blindly. The rover needed shelter before the power ran out. He searched the scanner and found an abandoned maintenance bunker 2 kilometers east. It was risky, but it was their only chance. The girl suddenly looked up, her small voice barely a whisper. "Something is following us." Ethan checked the radar again. A red blip appeared, then disappeared. He cursed under his breath and pressed the throttle. The engines roared. The rover bounced across frozen rocks. Behind them, dark shapes began to appear through the storm. Flying drones, their red lights cutting through the snow like knives. Ethan turned to her. "Hold on tight." She grabbed the seat handle with both hands. The chase had begun. The drones fired short, energy blasts that burned through the snow. One hit the back of the rover, throwing sparks. Ethan swerved left, then right, the tires sliding over the ice. He managed to reach a ridge and dived the rover down into a narrow ravine. The drones hovered above, searching the crevice, but the storm was too thick. They waited in silence. Only the sound of the wind and their heavy breathing filled the small cabin. Ethan looked at her again. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, her eyes wide with fear. When he started the engine again, she spoke suddenly. "My name is Lyra." Her voice was quiet but clear. Ethan smiled. "Lyra, nice to meet you," he said, trying to sound calm, though his heart was still racing. She looked at him, unsure what a smile meant, but she didn't look away this time. They reached the small maintenance bunker near a cliff and stopped. The power cells were almost dead. Ethan stepped out into the snow, pulling her close behind him. He opened the metal door and guided her inside. It was dark and cold, but safer than outside. He started the emergency heater and the small space filled with a faint orange light. Lyra sat near it. Her hands stretched toward the warmth. Ethan took off his gloves and checked his injured arm, where a shard of metal had grazed him during the chase. She noticed the wound and moved closer without fear this time. Her fingers glowed faintly as she touched the edge of the cut. To his shock, the pain faded. He looked at her amazed. She pulled her hand back shyly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "No, don't be sorry, you helped." A short silence followed. The storm outside screamed like a beast. Inside the bunker, the two sat in the soft hum of the heater. Ethan spoke quietly. "Why? Were you in that cage, Lyra?" She didn't answer for a long moment, then she whispered, "They said I was dangerous." He frowned. "Do you believe that?" She shook her head. "I just wanted to go home." Ethan sighed and leaned against the wall. "Then we'll find your home." She looked at him confused. You'd help me. He smiled again. I already did, might as well finish the job. For the first time, she smiled back, small and shy, but real. Outside, the storm began to calm. But deep, in the dark sky above them, the drones were still searching. And far away, someone had already sent new orders to bring the escaped girl back alive. Morning came slow and gray. The storm outside had finally stopped, leaving the frozen plain silent again. Ethan woke to the soft hum of the heater and the faint sound of breathing beside him. Lyra sat near the doorway, watching the white light spill. Across the snow, her eyes lost somewhere far away. He stretched his stiff arms and walked toward the small workbench in the bunker where old alien tools were scattered. He began repairing the rover's damaged circuits, hoping it would run again before nightfall. Lyra stayed quiet, but he could feel her eyes on him, curious and cautious. After a while, she spoke in a low voice. "You've fixed things before, haven't you?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, used to repair ships during the war now. I just work alone." She lowered her gaze. "My people called your kind destroyers." Ethan stopped, his hand still. He looked at her carefully. "And what do you call us?" She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of her blanket. "I don't know yet." He smiled, faintly, and went back to his work. She came closer, drawn by the small sparks from the tools. Her wristband caught his eye this time. It had strange markings glowing faintly under the skin like a tattoo, but made of light. Ethan frowned. "What's that?" Lyra looked down quickly and tried to cover it. "Nothing, just a mark from the lab." He knelt beside her, gently taking her arm. "It looks like tech, not just a mark." She looked scared. "They said it helps them study how I survived the cold." Her voice shook as she spoke. "They put it there when I was little. I don't even remember how it started." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They experimented on you, didn't they?" Lyra didn't answer. She just nodded, once her eyes full of old pain. He let go of her arm softly. The silence grew heavy between them. Then the radio on the workbench crackled to life with a burst of static. Ethan rushed to turn down the volume, but a broken transmission came through. "Target identified, codename Lyra." Bounty confirmed. His heart sank. He turned to her and saw the fear in her face. "Who wants you?" he asked quietly. Lyra shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe the ones who made me. Maybe the ones who want to sell me." Ethan clenched his fists. He knew the voice on the radio. It was a mercenary channel. They were already hunting her. He turned off the radio and sat back. Trying to think, Lyra watched him, her voice trembling. "If they find me again, they'll put me back, in a cage or worse." He looked at her straight in the eyes. "I won't let that happen." For a moment, she didn't seem to believe him. No one ever had before. But there was something in his tone that felt different. Something that made her heart feel warm despite the cold air around them. Ethan walked to the storage crate and took out his survival pack. "We can't stay here. The signal will draw them soon. We move before night." Lyra stood slowly, wrapping the coat around her shoulders. "Where will we go?" "Far away," he said. "Somewhere scanners can't reach." He opened the bunker door and looked out at the white horizon. The storm had cleared, revealing a faint blue glow in the distance. A city of metal and glass, the remains of an old alien capital now abandoned and haunted by silence. "That's where we start," he said. Lyra stepped beside him, the cold wind touching her hair. For a moment she looked small against the vast empty land. But there was something growing inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder. "We'll find answers there." As they began walking to the rover, Lyra looked at his wounded arm from yesterday. Without a word, she reached out again. Her fingers glowed softly and the wound closed, leaving only a faint scar. Ethan stared, surprised. "How did you do that?" She shook her head. "I don't know. It just happens when I feel someone's pain." He smiled gently. "Then maybe your people were wrong about you." Lyra looked up at him, and for the first time since he found her in that cage, she smiled back. But high above, in the thin sky, a drone hovered silently, its red lens recording everything. It turned and vanished into the cloud, sending a signal across the frozen world. They were not alone anymore. The cold wind hit their faces as they stepped outside the bunker. The sky was a pale shade of silver, and the land stretched far into the horizon, like a frozen desert. Ethan guided Lyra into the rover and checked the scanner again. No signals nearby, but his gut told him they were being watched. He started the engine and the machine rumbled to life. They drove through the empty plains heading toward the ruins of the old, alien city. For a while there was silence, only the soft hum of the rover and the crunch of ice beneath its wheels. Lyra looked out the window, her hands pressed against the glass. She had never seen freedom before. Not like this. The endless land, both. Scared and amazed her, Ethan glanced at her and saw how her eyes shimmered like small stars. "You'll like the city," he said. "We might find what we're looking for." But before she could answer, the radar beeped. One red dot appeared, then two, then a whole cluster. Ethan's jaw tightened. "They found us." Lyra turned quickly. "Who?" "Hunters, mercs, maybe both," he said. Gripping the wheel in the next moment, the sky lit up with distant flashes. Small crafts diving through the clouds, their engines glowing red. Ethan pressed the throttle. The rover leapt forward, bouncing over the frozen ground. Snow exploded around them as energy blasts hit nearby, sending shards of ice into the air. Lyra held onto the seat, her voice shaking. "They'll catch us, or not if I can help it," Ethan said. He turned sharply down a narrow valley between cliffs of black rock. The drones followed, their red lights glowing like angry eyes in the sky. The chase became a storm of fire and ice. The rover slid on sharp turns, but Ethan's hand stayed steady. He knew every trick, every move from his years in war. Still, the drones were faster, stronger, and endless. One shot hit the back of the rover. The cabin filled with smoke and sparks. Ethan coughed and slammed a fist on the control panel. "Hold tight, Lyra." She closed her eyes and held his arm. A soft blue glow spread from her hands across the cracked console. The smoke faded. The alarm stopped. Ethan looked at her in shock. "You just repaired it." She nodded weakly. "I don't know how I just felt it." The glow faded from her skin. Her breathing quickened, as if the effort drained her completely. Ethan wrapped his coat around her and pushed the rover harder through the storm. They broke out of the valley and saw the faint shape of the alien city ahead. Tall, broken towers reaching into the clouds like frozen giants. The drones were still behind them. He turned the rover toward a ruined bridge over a deep chasm. It was their only way through. Lyra looked terrified. "The bridge is broken." "I know," he said, his voice calm. "But we'll make it." The rover raced toward the edge, the engines screaming. The bridge cracked under their weight, but they kept going. Ethan pressed every ounce of power the machine had left. They jumped the gap. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Lyra's eyes widened, her small hands clutching his sleeve. The rover crashed on the other side, metal screeching, but it held. The bridge behind them collapsed into the abyss, taking 2 drones with it. Ethan stopped for breath, his hands shaking. They had made it. He turned to Lyra. "You okay?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't leave me behind." He smiled. "Tired but true. Never planned to." They drove slowly through the edge of the city where the air shimmered with old energy fields. Ruins stood silent like ghosts of a forgotten world. Ethan stopped near a tall tower, its top cracked open to the gray sky. Lyra stepped out, her feet sinking softly into the snow. She looked around with awe and sadness. "This was once home," she said. He looked at her quietly and replied, "Then maybe it can be again." Above them the clouds shifted. A faint red light blinked far away. Another signal. More hunters were coming, but for now, in the middle of the dead city surrounded by silence and snow, there was only the sound of their breathing and the steady beat of 2 hearts that refused to give up. The city stood silent under a gray sky. Frozen towers reached into the clouds like broken fingers, and old lights flickered inside shattered windows. Ethan guided Lyra through the ruins, their boots crunching softly on the icy ground. Every step echoed, like a whisper from the past. They found shelter inside a wide hall filled with fallen pillars and strange machines covered in frost. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, the same symbols that shimmered on Lyra's wrist. Ethan brushed the dust away and looked closer. "It's the same pattern," he said quietly. "Whatever they did to you started here." Lyra stared at the symbols, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "This place was part of the first colony," she whispered. "My people said it was forbidden, no one was allowed to return." Ethan studied her face. "Why forbidden?" She looked lost for words. "Because something here scared them." A low hum filled the room as if the city itself had heard her voice. A hidden door opened in the floor, revealing a stairway leading down into darkness. Ethan looked at her. "Seems like the city wants us to go." Lyra hesitated but nodded. They walked down the spiral path lit by pale blue lines along the walls. At the bottom was a chamber glowing with soft light and a single crystal device floating in the air. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Lyra stepped closer, drawn to it. The glow from the device matched the light in her wrist mark. Ethan reached out to stop her. "Careful, we don't know what it is." She looked back at him. "I think it's part of me." Before he could speak, she placed her hand on the crystal. The chamber burst into light. Images filled the air, projections of stars, planets, and warships burning in the sky. Ethan shielded his eyes while Lyra stood in the center, surrounded by glowing threads of energy. Her voice changed, it grew clearer, deeper. She spoke words not her own. "I am Lyra Model Prototype, 01, Vessel of Harmony. Key to the ceasefire." The words echoed around them, fading into silence. Lyra dropped to her knees, breathing fast. Ethan ran to her side, holding her shoulders. "What did that mean?" She looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "They made me to stop. The war not as a weapon but as a bridge between our kinds," he helped her stand. "Then they failed because both sides kept fighting." She shook her head. "No, they didn't fail. I was never activated. They left me here locked away before the peace signal could be sent." Ethan looked at the glowing device, now dim again. "So if we activate it now, it could end what's left of the war." Lyra nodded slowly. "But the signal needs a link from both species, human and mine, only together. It can start." She looked at him with hope and fear. "You could be the link, Ethan." Before he could answer, the ground shook. The ceiling above them cracked as blasts echoed outside. The hunters had arrived. Ethan grabbed her hand. "We move now. We can't let them get this device." They ran up the stairs, the chamber lights fading behind them. Outside, the sky burned with red light as enemy ships descended on the city. Ethan pulled Lyra behind a fallen wall, blaster fire cutting through the air. He aimed his rifle and returned fire, covering their escape. Lyra's wrist glowed again, bright and wild. Her eyes filled with light, and she raised her hand toward the sky. The air shimmered as an invisible wave burst outward, knocking the nearest drones from the sky. She gasped, falling to her knees. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. "You did good, but we need to leave now." He carried her to the rover parked beside a ruined tower and started the engine. Smoke and fire filled the streets as they sped through the collapsing city. Behind them, the tower crumbled and a deep roar shook the ground. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Hang on, Lyra, we'll finish this." She opened her eyes weakly. "Where are we going?" "To the tower. At the northern ridge, it has a long-range signal relay. If we reach it, we can send your message to everyone." Lyra nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. The rover disappeared into the gray horizon, leaving behind the burning ruins of the city and the secret that could save or destroy both their worlds. The sky burned with fire and smoke as Ethan drove toward the northern ridge. The ground shook beneath the rover wheels, and the sound of explosions rolled across the plains. The enemy ships were close behind, their lights flashing like angry stars above the frozen land. Lyra sat beside him, pale and weak, but her eyes still glowed with faint blue light. She held the crystal device close to her chest, its pulse matching her heartbeat. Ethan kept his focus on the dark mountain ahead, where the ancient signal tower rose like a spear against the clouds. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking on the controls. Lyra looked at him quietly. "You're hurt." He glanced down at the burn across his arm. "I'll live, we just need to reach that tower." The wind screamed louder as the ships descended through the clouds, firing at the ground around them. Each blast sent snow and shards of ice flying. Into the air, Ethan steered through the chaos, using every bit of cover he could find, until the base of the ridge appeared before them. He slammed the rover to a stop and jumped out, pulling Lyra with him. They climbed the steep path, slipping on the ice. The tower loomed above them, its ancient frame half broken but still standing. It hummed faintly, like it was waiting for someone to wake it again. Halfway up the ridge, the first wave of drones appeared through the smoke. Red eyes glowing there. Weapons charging, Ethan turned and fired his rifle. Each shot echoed across the cliffs. He took down 1, 2, 3, but there were too many. Lyra reached out her hand and a ripple of blue energy burst from her palm, throwing the drones off balance, but it drained her fast. She staggered. Ethan caught her and pulled her behind a large rock. "You can't keep doing that, it's killing you," he said. She looked up at him, breathing hard. "If I don't do it, they'll kill you instead." He stared at her, then nodded. "All right, we do this together." They pushed forward step by step through fire and wind until they reached the tower entrance. Inside, it was dark and filled with strange machinery covered in frost. Ethan found the main control terminal and wiped the dust from it. The screen flickered alive, showing symbols and codes in both human and alien language. Lyra placed the crystal on the panel and the tower began to hum. Light spread through the walls like veins of blue fire. "This is it," she whispered, "the peace signal." Outside, the drones closed in. Ethan blocked the doorway, firing at the shadows moving through the snow. He knew they couldn't hold for long. He shouted back to her, "How much longer?" "Just a few seconds more." A blast hit the wall near him and threw him to the ground. His vision blurred from pain, but he saw Lyra still standing, her hands glowing bright as she finished the final connection. The air filled with a deep sound like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Then the tower exploded with light. A wave of energy spread across the land, shining like dawn after endless night. The drones froze mid-air, their red lights fading into silence. The ships in the sky stopped firing, drifting as if the war itself had forgotten to continue. Ethan tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He fell to one knee, blood staining the snow. Lyra ran to him, her face pale and tearful. "You did it," he said, smiling weakly. "No, we did it," she answered. The glow around her began to fade. She fell beside him, holding his hand. "You gave me freedom, Ethan. Now you must live for both of us." He shook his head. "You're not dying, not after all this." But her hand slipped from his as the last light from the tower faded into the clouds. The world was silent again. Snow began to fall soft and slow, covering the broken ground. And the machines that once brought death, Ethan lay there for a long time, his eyes on the horizon, where the first sunlight touched the sky. He could feel the war ending somewhere far away. No more orders, no more cages, only peace. He whispered her name one last time. Lyra. And as the wind carried it across the silent ridge, the frozen world finally began to melt. Days passed since the tower sent its light across the frozen world. The storm had stopped and the sky had turned clear for the first time in years. Snow melted slowly, revealing the dark soil beneath, as if the planet itself was waking from a long dream. Ethan opened his eyes in a small recovery camp built near the ruins. The air smelled of smoke and medicine. His arm was wrapped in clean bandages and machines around him hummed softly. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his side. A medic crushed over, smiling. "You're lucky the rescue team found you. The tower almost collapsed before they got there." Ethan looked around, confused. "The girl Lyra, where is she?" The medic paused. "She saved the world and vanished when the signal ended. We thought you'd know where she went." He leaned back against the bed, his chest heavy with both pride and grief. Outside, he could hear voices of humans and aliens talking together. No anger, no fear. The war was over. Lyra's signal had reached every fleet and every commander. It didn't just stop the fighting. It erased the hate that kept it alive. A few days later, Ethan was strong enough to walk again. He stepped out into the sunlight and saw a sight he never imagined: human soldiers working, side by side with alien healers repairing broken machines and planting seeds in the thawing ground. Children of both worlds running together, laughing at the edge of the camp. It felt unreal after all the years of fire and loss. He walked beyond the camp toward the ridge where the tower once stood. Now it was only a tall, broken frame covered in melting frost. He stopped near a patch of glowing blue flowers growing in the snow. They shimmered faintly like Lyra's skin. Once did a voice came from behind him, soft and familiar. She liked this place. Ethan turned. A young alien woman stood there wearing a white cloak, her eyes glowing the same gentle blue. For a moment he couldn't speak. "Lyra," he whispered. She smiled, though her form flickered faintly like light passing through water. "I'm not really here, not like before," she said. "The energy from the signal changed me. I became part of the network, part of every message that connects our worlds now." He stepped closer, his throat tight. "So you're alive?" "In a way, yes," she said. "Every time humans and my people speak in peace, every time they help each other, a little piece of me lives again." He looked down at the flowers, then back at her. "You did. More than stop a war, Lyra, you gave us a chance to start over." She smiled softly. "And you gave me my freedom. Without you, I'd still be trapped in darkness." The wind brushed past them, carrying the sound of children's laughter from the camp. Lyra's form shimmered brighter, as if the light itself was smiling. "I came to say goodbye, Ethan," she said. "My time here is almost gone. The signal is fading, and soon I'll just be light in the air." He wanted to speak, but the words refused. To come, he could only nod, his eyes wet with quiet tears. Lyra reached out her hand the same way she did when he first opened her cage. Their fingers touched, though she felt like warmth and air. "Thank you for seeing me as someone, not something," she whispered. Then her light faded, slowly drifting upward into the sky. Ethan watched until the last spark vanished in the wind. He stood there for a long time, breathing the cold, clean air. The sky above was full of dawn colors, pink and gold, spreading. Across the melting ice, a new world was being born, and he was part of it. When he returned to camp, the children ran past him, laughing, their hands full of those glowing flowers. One of them, a small alien girl, stopped and looked up at him. "My mother says peace came because a human was kind," she said. Ethan smiled gently. "Then remember that kindness is the strongest weapon we ever had." She nodded and ran off, joining the others. Ethan looked once more at the horizon where the tower had stood, and whispered her name quietly. Not with sadness this time, but with gratitude, "Lyra." The wind carried it softly across the plains as the sun rose higher, shining on a world no longer divided, and in that light for just a moment he thought he saw her, again smiling among the clouds, watching the world she helped create.